Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cancer Research Institute's Cancer Immunotherapy and You webinar series. Today's date is June 21st, 2017, and the topic for today's webinar is Cancer Immunotherapy Clinical Trials, Patient Perspectives. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website and our YouTube channel. My name is Brian Brewer, and I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at the Cancer Research Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to saving more lives by funding research that aims to harness the immune system's power to conquer all cancers. This work has contributed to the development of life-saving immunotherapies for a variety of cancer types. We present this webinar series to patients and caregivers to help them understand what immunotherapy is and how it differs from other treatments, to provide information on the latest developments in research and treatment, and to connect patients to immunotherapy clinical trials. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors. This webinar series is made possible with generous support from Bristol-Myers Squibb, Genentech, Regeneron, and Advaxis. Today's webinar is being presented as part of Cancer Immunotherapy Month. Throughout June, the Cancer Research Institute is providing a number of ways patients and caregivers, as well as donors, supporters, and our nonprofit and corporate partners can learn more about cancer immunotherapy. This includes our Ask a Scientist and immunotherapy patient story videos, daily blog coverage of immunotherapy news from the world's largest oncology conference, our Wear White social media campaign, and more. You can learn more about our June activities by visiting cancerresearch.org/June. I'd also like to mention that if you're interested in learning about cancer immunotherapy from the experts, connecting with other cancer patients and caregivers, and exploring your clinical trial options, the Cancer Research Institute is hosting an immunotherapy patient summit series in 5 cities across the United States, starting next month on Saturday, July 8th in San Francisco, followed by Saturday summits in Chicago, New York City, Houston, and Tampa. It is free to attend, and we encourage you to register today at cancerresearch.org/summit. Now, at long last, it's my pleasure to welcome today's guest speakers. We're supposed to have 3 immunotherapy patients. Carol Roth is not on the webinar at the moment, but if she joins us later, I'll try to get her in on this, what I anticipate is going to be a wonderful conversation. But I'd like to welcome Jami Cameron and Janie Ferling, and thank you very much, both of you, for making time today to be with us, to share your experiences with cancer, and particularly your experiences as a participant in an immunotherapy clinical trial. After you introduce yourselves, I'll be asking you questions that patients commonly ask us at the Cancer Research Institute about the experience patients will have on immunotherapy trials. So with that, I'd like to invite Jami to speak first, and then Janie, would you please tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Hi, I'm Jami Cameron. I was first diagnosed with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in 1994. So I have been dealing with this for about 22 years off and on. I had chemo, radiation, an autologous stem cell transplant, and then entered a clinical trial for immunotherapy. I had CAR T in April of 2016.
And Janie?
Hi, I'm Janie Ferling. I was diagnosed 4 years ago with stage 3 metastatic melanoma. I've just completed a 2-year clinical trial, and it was a success.
Okay. Good news, Carol is in the room, and she is getting herself set up with her camera, so hopefully she'll be able to join in on the conversation. I think that's her coming in now. We see you, Carol. Welcome. I think we need you to turn on your microphone so that everyone can hear you. Now, in the meantime, while we wait for Carol's microphone to work, I'd like to ask, first, Jami, I'd like to ask you to say a little bit more about, you've had what you've described as more than a 20-year marathon run with cancer. Can you tell us about the different types of treatments you received? And then when was the moment that you first learned about immunotherapy?
So the first treatment I had was, a chemo and radiation. It was a pretty standard, it was CHOP chemotherapy and about 6 weeks of radiation. And then I went into remission for about 15 years. And then I had it recur in my eye. And so I had to have a really aggressive chemotherapy to include spinal chemotherapy. I mean, it was a very, very aggressive treatment. And then it recurred again. And let me get rid of that. Then at that point, I needed to have a stem cell transplant, and that was an autologous stem cell transplant. So I was able to donate my own cells. But within 6 months of that stem cell treatment, my lymphoma was back bigger than ever. So at that point, my bone marrow had really not rebounded, because I also had breast cancer in between the eye cancer and the recurrence of lymphoma that needed the stem cell transplant. So it was really, for about 4 years, it was just every 6 months I was getting a chemo regimen. So my bone marrow was severely suppressed. So it was clear that the only option for me was either a donor stem cell transplant, for which I did not have a good donor match. So I had decided against that. And so that's when I went to looking at a clinical trial and found this immunotherapy clinical trial. And that was the first I had heard really of a CAR T clinical trial, was when I was working with a navigator, and they were seeing that even in other clinical trials of other medications, I was not eligible because of the poor condition of my bone marrow, and because I'd had breast cancer, and because I had had cancer in my eye. I mean, there was all kinds of exclusions. So I was lucky to find one that would allow me to be in the trial.
Okay, and Janie, how did you find an immunotherapy trial? When did you first hear about immunotherapy?
Well, I was diagnosed 4 years ago, and I had a tumor in my neck. And so the first thing I had to do was have surgery to have that removed. And then after that was removed, then we were trying to decide what to do as follow-up, as some kind of a systemic treatment. And at that time, the only thing available was interferon. That's what was being recommended to me. And so I went for a second opinion to UCLA, and they agreed that interferon would be the next thing to do. That would be the appropriate protocol, unless, of course, I could qualify and if I were interested in a particular clinical trial. Turns out that I did not meet the qualifications. I didn't have the BRAF mutation that was required for that trial. That was the first time that I had heard of it. About 2 years later, I actually did get into a clinical trial that used immunotherapy. But at the time, I had never heard of it. The friends that I spoke to about had never heard of it. Now I see advertisements on television all the time.
It really is amazing in such a short period, and even just the last 5 years, where immunotherapy suddenly is becoming a known word. But many patients like you who have been treated before all of this happened, it's like a whole new world. It really is. So, Carol, we see you there. I'm just wondering, is your microphone working?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, and welcome. We would love for you to introduce yourself to our viewers. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what your cancer experience has been like so far, in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Well, I'm sorry for my delay hopping on. I have stage 4 glioblastoma. I was diagnosed in the fall of 2015, late fall. And right now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And in addition to this wonderful clinical trial that I've been on that's been so helpful to me to get my life back, I'm still working full time, which is why I was a little late. I had another call that ran late, so but I wouldn't be able to be late with other meetings if it wasn't for this clinical trial. So the story was that it was in the fall of 2015. The only symptom I had, and I know when you think of brain cancer, you're always thinking of excruciating headache. I didn't have any of that. The only symptom I had was that I could not feel my toes. I couldn't move them in my right foot. So it didn't take long for an MRI to happen, and within a month of that MRI, I had brain surgery, which was horrifying to me, just the sound of it, but the surgeons here in Charlotte were amazing. I had a very speedy recovery. I was walking around the next day, albeit with a limp, because my brain tumor rests on my motor strip, so it affects my mobility. And then from there, I had a month of recovery, and then I went through 6 weeks of chemo radiation here in Charlotte, followed by 2 months of oral chemo. And that's when we hit a roadblock, we had a problem. Not only did my tumor grow, but they found another tumor on my arm cortex, which is why my arm still today is numb from the elbow up to the shoulder. We found the clinical trial, and it was go from there. I'm sure I'll have other chances to expand on that, my experience with clinical trial at another point during this panel.
So I'd like to ask now Jami with an M. What was your experience like receiving CAR T therapy? And when I say what was the experience like, what was a typical treatment day in the clinic for you? And how was it different from other treatments you'd received?
So for the CAR T, there was a first collection of my T cells. And so that was, just having a catheter inserted that was big enough to collect the T cells. And then the process took a couple of hours, and then the catheter was removed. And then they sent my T cells off and to a lab to be re-engineered to go after my cancer. So then I waited a few weeks, and then when my cells were ready, then I went back to the site and received about 3 days of very low dose lymphodepleting chemotherapy. It was just there to clean out the lymphocytes, my T cells that were there that weren't working so well, so that the new ones could get in there and do their job. And then I got my T cells back in the hospital at Mass General, and it was, a tiny little vial of a lot of millions of T cells, and it was just pushed into my port, and then we sat and wait. So I was in the hospital just so they could monitor me for side effects. I was patient number 3 in the clinical trial, so it was new to them as we were kind of all learning together, and it went very smoothly. I did get a fever. I did get a port infection while I was there, and I got severe pain in the area of my tumor. And that was a sign that the CAR T cells were going to work and getting rid of my massive tumor that I had in my pelvis. And by day 3, I couldn't see the tumor that was protruding anymore. So we had a very rapid response, and I did very, very well. I would have gotten out of the hospital early in about 4 or 5 days had I not gotten that port infection. So that kept me there for an extra week. But other than that, it was a very easily tolerated treatment. I got discharged from the hospital and had to stay in the Boston area for about 4 more weeks. And we literally were like tourists walking around Boston, just enjoying the area. And that was a vast contrast to the stem cell transplant, and that chemo that I had gotten just completely wiped me out. And I guess I did better than 90% of people who get this stem cell transplant, but I was knocked down, and it took me a long time to recover. Very sick with the chemo, and really had a lot of vomiting and everything with that. And I didn't have any of that with the CAR T treatment.
Janie, what was your experience like receiving treatment? And your treatment was interesting because you received a combination of immunotherapies. Can you tell us about that combination and then what the experience was like receiving it?
Well, I was in a phase 1 clinical trial, although both drugs had been used before. One of them is TVEC, which is a deactivated herpes virus that was injected directly into the tumor. And the other one is pembrolizumab, Keytruda, and that was given as an IV. And both of those drugs had been used independently, but not together. So that's why it was a phase 1. And they were trying to figure out the appropriate dosages and did I lose you? There you go. The doses they didn't know. I had an immediate reaction to the TVEC with side effects, very high fever in the hospital, learning how to adjust it so that I could pre-medicate and post-medicate with a combination of Tylenol and Aleve and just whatever would work. We played around with that. And I did that for 2 years. After 1 year, the tumor was not large enough to inject anymore, and so we stopped with the injection. And when that stopped, so did the side effects. All the side effects I had, and there was neuropathy in my feet, the fever, nausea, that all came from the TVEC. The other drug did not have any side effects at all.
And you shared with us in a video story about your experience on that trial that there was a very special moment when you went in to see your doctor to receive treatment and you were no longer eligible to receive treatment. Can you say a little bit about that? What happened?
Well, I did receive treatment. It's just that it was a combination. It was a combination treatment where they were injecting the tumors and then there was no tumor left to inject. And that was very exciting for everybody because the previous visit, there had been a tumor. It took a long time for me to respond, very long time. And it was about 9 months into it that there was no longer a tumor left to inject. But I still got the transfusion treatments. I just didn't get the injection. I got the infusion, but not the, yeah.
You bring up a really interesting topic, which is the time to respond. Jamie, in 3 days, she's poof, it's gone. You took 9 months. Carol, how long did it take before you started seeing a response to your immunotherapy?
So I was on my clinical trial, cancer research trial at Dana-Farber in Boston for about 8 months. And I started to see results actually after my first MRI. So that was about 6 weeks after I started the treatment. I had about a 50% reduction in my tumor, which was amazing. And then after 8 months, which is very close to where we are now, I saw one tumor, the smaller second tumor, completely disappear, completely. And the second one, it's still there, but in brain cancer, there's no such thing as remission. But my doctor said that it's not active. And for me, that is incredible. So it didn't take very long for my treatment to start working, my trial to start working.
Okay. I think that's an important point just to share with those who are watching who have not experienced immunotherapy yet, that it does respond. You will respond to it differently if you respond, and not everyone responds, of course. But if you do, you will respond differently than when you're receiving treatment with a chemotherapy. In many cases, when you're treated with chemotherapy, those drugs can work immediately. You know right away if it's working, if it's having an effect, because that tumor is disappearing, but you also have often those terrible side effects. Immunotherapy could take a while because what you're doing is you're treating your immune system first and teaching your immune system how to identify the tumors and to attack it and release those breaks. Perhaps, Jamie, the reason yours worked so quickly was your immune system got educated outside of your body in a laboratory and then injected back into you. And so they were able to circumvent the time it took. I'd like to ask each of you, we'll start with you, Janie, about your medical team and who was part of that team. It's often more than just the doctor. What did your team look like, and who was did you have a go-to or someone that you went to for your information about what was happening?
I missed a little bit of the question, but I think you were asking what's my medical team consisting of? You mean with the immunotherapy part of it? Yeah. Okay. So, I had a local oncologist that really wasn't aware about the clinical trial, and then I got into the clinical trial in Boston. So then I, was involved with that doctor there, and there were nurse practitioners and mostly one nurse practitioner and one physician. And then, of course, when I was in the hospital, it was just the regular, nursing staff and that kind of thing. But I was always seeing the one physician, back who was in charge of the clinical trial. And it was very personal. And, you could tell that this was his baby. And every doctor that came in while I was in the hospital, if there was a question, immediately he was called, even if he wasn't there that day. And, he assured me I am large and in charge. And even though I'm not there for the day, I will be over every single phone call and looking at every single lab and everything. So that was very reassuring, because he and I made a very close bond, I felt like. I mean, every time I see him, we give each other a big hug, and we're just, I feel very, very close and confident in him, because he took this very seriously, and he knew what I was investing, and he took that very seriously, which was great.
Janie, what was your medical team like?
Well, I had my clinical trial at UCLA, so there was everyone at UCLA, plus then my own private doctors. I belong to Kaiser, and so through Kaiser, I have an oncologist, a dermatologist, and an ophthalmologist that I see every 3 months. Part of my melanoma is that it's spread to the brain, and it's the ophthalmologist who is following that. So I see all of them every 3 months, plus I have regular MRIs and CAT scans, and those people all know me very well now. And I also have someone who's a Chinese doctor who practices Eastern medicine. And I had first approached him when I was on interferon, because the treatment was very difficult for me to tolerate, and my liver enzymes got very high. And so it's really a combination of all of them that got me to where I am. I also have a cousin who is a PhD in microbiology who works at UCLA. I had no idea that she would know anything about cancer or the trial that I was in. She works on bubble boy syndrome and works in gene therapy. But she turned out to be a very important part of my team. She would come to my doctor's appointments and translate what was going on. I didn't know anything about the immune system when I started this. And it was very helpful to have somebody help me navigate this.
All right. And Carol, how about you? Did you have a similar experience?
I did. Yeah, I have a great team as well. So it was here in Charlotte that after my diagnosis, after my surgery, when the pathology came back, that said it was definitely glioblastoma stage 4, that I met with an oncologist, and he and the great nursing staff there brought me through all the 6 weeks and 2 months plus before we got to the point where I was in trouble. And it was he was the one who recommended that I try an immunotherapy clinical trial, which is what on the back end was something I had already been researching. So we were right in sync. So he connected with Dr. Reardon at Dana-Farber, and we got started. And since being there, I've got Dr. Reardon, I've got a nurse practitioner who I see regularly. I'm there every 2 weeks. I fly to Boston from Charlotte every 2 weeks. And this year, it actually will be a year that I've been going there. So they've been just a great team. I have my blood work done with a great, in the lab every 2 weeks. I got my MRIs every 6 weeks. And then the infusion team, every 2 weeks, they are just all wonderful and very much a part of my continued care and treatment.
Was this treatment and the attention that is on you as a patient in a clinical trial, was it different from other treatments, other experiences with your community oncologist or any of your other cancer doctors? Jamie, let's start with you.
My local oncologist was very supportive of the clinical trial and getting me there. And he continues to support me locally. And then whenever I go, then when I go to Boston about every 3 months, but we're in constant communication. He and then the doctor in Boston are, in constant communication. But so, I'm very high on the radar of both doctors. I can communicate with both of them by text, and they answer me in the evenings. And so it's a special relationship because, they took it very seriously. I was very ill, and they have been wonderful to me. And, I'm a nurse practitioner, so it's been really good, easier for me because I understand all the lingo. I know when to call them about something and when not to. So I think when they hear from me, they know that this is serious and we need to really address this quickly. So that's been great.
Janie?
Well, my experience with UCLA has been fantastic. I really like that whole team, and I see them as my primary caregivers in this treatment. My outside doctor, I tell her what's going on and what the treatment I'm on. She doesn't really know. She only knows what's FDA approved and what she can prescribe for her patients. UCLA is cutting edge. They have all the research knowledge at their disposal, and I like sharing that information with my outside oncologist. But really, the UCLA doctors have been my primary go-to people.
And Carol, how about you?
So my oncologist, even though they're in Charlotte, the doctor who referred me to Dana-Farber, he is still and his team very much in the loop on my care. I send him updates after every MRI. I get an email sometimes from the nurse here in Charlotte to say, when's your next MRI? Let us know. So they've been very much included in what's going on. And I think the care and attention to detail, I know it's in every medical team across the country, but I will say on a clinical trial, they are monitoring you so closely so that they could prevent any issues that might come up or anything that you might need, with side effects. That monitoring and the blood work every 2 weeks, I'm actually relieved when I leave there that my blood work was okay and that they monitored it. It's like a relief. I've got enough to deal with, and the fact that they're monitoring me so very carefully is fantastic. And again, it's a relief that I could live my life because I know they're taking such good care of me. And that includes, any possible side effects, that anything I let them know they take care of.
So each of you has mentioned kind of how you did research and found these trials. Jamie, you mentioned that a navigator helped you. Can you say a little bit more about, what was the challenge? You're a nurse practitioner, so you understand clinical trials. So I'm sure you can imagine someone who is coming into this completely, naive in terms of not having had any experience and understanding what clinical trials are, even how to search for them. So, what advice would you give to patients who are interested in finding a clinical trial?
For me, I had been in touch with this woman who was this navigator through the Lymphoma and Leukemia Society the year prior when I was having a stem cell transplant. And I had gotten in touch with her to try to decide which type of transplant and where to go. And she was just so helpful in helping me make that decision. So are you still getting a lot of feedback on my...
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Let me turn this down some more because I'm starting to hear it too. But is that any better?
Yeah, let's
see if that's better.
Yeah, we'll give that a try.
That better? Okay. So she was like my first call whenever I knew that there was really no option for me. And she went line by line on clinicaltrials.gov. And honestly, I had never been on clinicaltrials.gov. I didn't know about that site. I didn't know how to get into it. And so she really treated me like she would have treated anyone who had never gone through this before. And she pulled it up and she said, get your computer, pull it up. And at the same time, she and I went line by line together, looked at the exclusions, looked at the eligibility criteria, and she, quickly could say, no, you're not going to be eligible for this one, or yes, this might be a good one. And then we narrowed it down, and then I took that information to my doctor. So that was my experience with, how to get into one. And then she was so knowledgeable. She had a connection at every one of these hospitals. So she was able to get right to them and email me back and say, I just spoke to them, and yes, they are enrolling. And, I just spoke to them, and they're kind of on a hold right now. So she was really integral in getting me all that information. And then I took it from there. Once we selected the trial that I was eligible for, then I looked at all the trial sites, and I personally emailed every one of those doctors with a summary of my medical records, just a short summary. And the first one to answer me was the one from Boston, Dr. Abramson, and that's how I got in. So I really encourage people to have their medical records, just have a brief summary. Like for me, there was one nurse practitioner that did the most incredible summary of my medical history when I had my transplant. So I had that printed out because that was a simple thing for them to read, so that they didn't have to go through 9 pages of medical history. And then I just had my latest scan, my biopsy results, that kind of thing, that I could attach to this email. Sometimes it's the doctor that you're emailing in these trials. Sometimes it's a trial coordinator. But it's just really helpful for you to be able to attach that information really quickly so they can quickly look over it and know whether you would be considered or not.
Okay. And Janie, how about you?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. I was just asking, how did you find the clinical trial, and what was the process like of researching your clinical trial options, and how did you ultimately make the decision?
Well, I asked my doctor about clinical trials, and she gave me the website, the clinicaltrial.gov website, and I went to it and I found it very overwhelming. I'm the sick person, and here I am trying to advocate for myself. And it was very, very difficult. I got a referral to Tony Rebus at UCLA. And so when I went to see him for my second opinion, he not only participated in clinical trials at that facility, but knew about all the other clinical trials that were going on that might be appropriate for me. And that's really how I found out about it. I found the .gov website to be very overwhelming. I didn't know that there were people out there who were navigators who could help you. That would have been a great thing for me had I known about it.
And Carol, how about you?
Janie, I so agree with you. Here you are, like, so sick and worried and scared and nervous and not knowing what your future is, and you have to find out what the next step is. From my surgery till I had about a month from my surgery before I met my oncologist here in Charlotte, and I was doing the same thing, saying, okay, what do I do next? All my friends are sending me emails, do this, do that, go here, go there, and it was just overwhelming. And I didn't know either about the navigator, but I was going to that clinical trial website, and I had about 4 or 5 places that looked interesting to me with clinical trials. But then I sort of put it on the back burner because I started the standard of care for brain cancer, which is 6 weeks radiation, chemo, and then oral. So I sort of put it on the back burner, but I was always looking at the clinical trials. And then it was really my oncologist in Charlotte who mentioned it to me. And the one that he referred was at Dana-Farber with a colleague. He actually knows Dr. Reardon. They used to work together. And so that's how we were connected. But, here I am in the background. I have the same clinical trial that he has for me. So it was kind of synchronicity that we both came together at the same time.
That's wonderful. I'm just going to throw this question out there because we get it a lot. There's a lot of confusion among patients on, the cost of drugs, the costs of participating in a clinical trial, insurance coverage issues. Jamie, were there any surprise expenses associated with your treatment in the trial, or do you know what was covered and what wasn't covered?
Mhm. Everything that had to do with the trial, including the hospitalization, all the lab work, all the scans, everything medically that had to do with the trial was covered by the trial. It was not billed to my insurance. Anything that was regular cancer care was billed to my insurance. So say, I'm trying to think, after I was finished with the trial, but I'm still in the trial for follow-up, but as soon as I needed like some kind of lab for something else that didn't have to do really with the trial, then that would be billed to my insurance. But every hospitalization, all that stuff was. Of course, the travel is not covered. And so that's a big consideration for a lot of people is if the trial site is away from your home, then you need to cover the expenses related to that. And then I did find that a medical social worker was helpful in helping find housing. If you qualify financially, there were grants. That kind of thing was very helpful for the things that weren't covered in the trial.
Janie, how about you? Did you run into any gotcha expenses that you weren't expecting, or what was that like?
Before I got into the clinical trial, just my second opinion doctor's appointment cost over $700. And I had a few more treatments at UCLA, just consulting, trying to get into a trial. And that was less, but it was still a few $100s for each appointment. Once I got into the trial was completely taken care of for treatment. I had outside insurance, and that was used, my Kaiser insurance, for all of the scans. So I have 3 MRIs and a CAT scan every 3 months. Plus I've had an annual PET scan. The copays on that would be very high. I personally have benefited from the Affordable Care Act in a big way. Without that, it would have just killed me with the copays. Once my cancer went from stage 3 to stage 4, I was put on permanent disability. And so now I get Medi-Cal and Social Security and Medicare. And so I don't have any copays right now. But if I didn't have that, it would be quite expensive. Even the doctors that I see every 3 months, even though my trial's over, I continue to see specialists. These are not regular WellCare visits. These are specialists in dermatology, ophthalmology, and oncology. And so I have learned how to work the system so that I can do it. But without it, I would be financially wiped out.
It almost sounds like, this is a whole separate area of support and need for patients, just navigating the costs of clinical trials. So, Carol, what was your experience like?
So the majority of my trial right now, my insurance covers, luckily. The only problem is the travel, which has been astronomical. Just think for the first month that I started the trial, I had to travel to Boston actually every week. Every week I had to travel. So the cost of the travel has just been crazy. Luckily, the hospital put me in touch with a foundation. Jamie, we need to get together if you need travel expenses, because I actually found a foundation that covers 50% of my travel expenses, meaning my airfare. And then the hospital in Boston has a special hotel, 2 hotels that they have a room block at that I get a very good discounted rate. And the hospital also has, that hotel also has free shuttle to and from the airport into the hospital. So that has helped a lot. And then more recently, the trial has said that they will cover some of my travel expenses. So that's going to be very helpful.
Do you happen to recall the name of the foundation that's helping you with your travel expenses?
Yes, it's the Lazarus Foundation out of California.
Oh, sure.
And what they do, they look at your income, and then based on that is how much they'll provide if you're approved. But they've been fantastic.
Yeah, it's a wonderful organization. So we are almost out of time. We could talk about this all day, but I know that cancer is not what defines you, and it's not what decides who you are and how you live your life. So I would love if you could just kind of close out, each of you, by sharing how your treatment in an immunotherapy trial and the fact that you're still here and your disease is either gone or stable. What now do you have to look forward to?
I couldn't hear the last part of that question.
Just what are you looking forward to now that you've gotten through this experience?
Want to start with me?
Yes.
Yes, I actually got married in the middle of my stem cell transplant. So after my CAR T, we were able to enjoy a honeymoon finally that was long overdue. And now I am like a wedding planner for my daughter who's going to get married this year on my birthday. So all of my time is now dedicated between doctor's offices and visits to planning that wedding, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
That's excellent. Janie?
Well, the last 4 years I've been all consumed with cancer and getting better, but I still tried to maintain a life and do things that were fun. As soon as I could, I would travel, I would see friends, and I continued to do that. 2017 has been very busy for me. In January, I sold my business, and in February, I stopped my treatment. I still continue now for follow-ups, but I stopped my every other week treatment. Then I moved out of Los Angeles, not too far, just an hour north by the beach. And then I had my 60th birthday. So it's just been one thing after the next, and I'm just moving forward, and I'm reinventing myself and finding out now what I want to do. That's great.
And Carol?
Oh, busy. I do a lot of traveling. I'm actually a director of individual giving for the National MS Society. And my region is quite large. It's the Carolinas, it's the Virginias, it's DC. Last week, I was in DC for work for 2 days, and then I flew to Boston for treatment and came home. So I'm just enjoying the fact that I'm able to have such a full-time career and job. And somehow I always fit my visits to Boston around my travel schedule. I have more travel planned coming up over the summer, so I'm very grateful that I'm able to do all this. Everyone says, aren't you tired? And I said, I'm glad I'm tired. I'm glad I have the opportunity to do all this. So.
Well, it's really heartwarming for me to hear each of your stories and know that the work of this organization, the Cancer Research Institute, has played a role in your successful treatment with immunotherapy, and the fact that you all get to live your lives the way that you should be. So that's really great, and thank you for sharing that with all of us. So with that, I am going to wrap up this wonderful webinar and thank each of you once again for taking time today to speak with all of us about these experiences and giving us some very helpful tips and practical information about how to prepare for finding a clinical trial and talking with your oncology team about it. I'd like once more just to thank our very generous sponsors who've made this entire webinar series possible this year. That's Bristol-Myers Squibb, Genentech, Regeneron, and Advaxis Immunotherapies. And this webinar, as I mentioned, will be available on the Cancer Research Institute website at cancerresearch.org/webinar webinars. We also have a whole library of webinars, most of them featuring immunotherapy experts who are delving a little deeper into the science behind specific types of cancer. So if you're interested in immunotherapy for your type of cancer, I would encourage you to visit that page on our website and find a webinar. Hopefully there's a webinar there for you. We also have some general immunology 101 webinars there if you want to really get into the nerdy science about this wonderful new way to treat cancer. And so with that, I will bid adieu to our three very wonderful guests and all of the folks out there who are watching this. Thank you very much. And I hope that you all have a very wonderful rest of Cancer Immunotherapy Month and a great summer ahead. See you soon.